Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon, watching the stars through the main display screen when the ON's communication system began making strange sounds that nobody on his crew had ever heard before. The sounds were not like human voices or any machine noise they knew, but something that seemed to pulse and vibrate like music made of light. Itself, Dr. Lisa Bennett rushed to her station and began working on the alien signal with her hands, moving quickly across the control panels. She was the best science officer in the human fleet, and Jake trusted her completely when it came to unknown discoveries in space. Message took 3 hours to decode, and when Lisa finally understood what it said, her face went pale, and she called Jake over to her station immediately. The transmission came from a star system called Kepler 442b, and it was a warning message sent by beings who called themselves the Valthara. Jake read the translated message on Lisa's screen and felt his heart beating faster with each word. Valthara were telling all space travelers to stay away from their home planet because it contained something they called the Sanctum of Eternal Memory, which was the most sacred place in their entire civilization. Any being that set foot on their world would be killed, and their entire species would face complete destruction. Commander Ryan Phillips walked over and read the message too, and immediately told Jake that they should turn the ship around and leave this system as fast as possible. Ryan was the diplomatic advisor, and he always thought about avoiding conflicts with alien races. But Jake was thinking about something else entirely. Lisa had been scanning the planet while they received the message, and her readings showed energy signatures unlike anything humans had ever discovered. The power levels coming from the surface were enormous and could solve humanity's biggest problem, which was finding new sources of energy for their growing colonies across the galaxy. Jake knew that Earth and all the human settlements were running out of power sources, and millions of people would die if they could not find alternatives soon. The war with the Krellian Empire had destroyed many of their mining operations, and supply lines were getting smaller every month. He looked at his crew and saw the fear in their eyes, but also the hope that maybe this discovery could save their entire species. The readings from Lisa's instruments showed that whatever technology the Valthara had on their planet could power human civilization for thousands of years. Ryan argued with Jake for over an hour, trying to convince him that the risk was too great and that they should report their findings to Earth Command and let someone else make the decision. But Jake knew that by the time Earth Command sent another expedition, it might be too late for the people who were already dying from power shortages. USS Horizon moved closer to the Valthara planet, and immediately automated defense systems began targeting their ship with weapons that fired beams of pure energy. Jake ordered his crew to raise shields, but the alien weapons were much more powerful than anything humans had built. Warning messages kept coming from the planet's surface, and each one was more threatening than the last. The Valthara were telling them to leave immediately or face destruction, but Jake could see on the scanner that the energy source was located in a massive structure near the planet's north pole. Lisa reported that the ship's hull was taking serious damage from the energy weapons, and they could not stay in orbit much longer without being destroyed completely. Jake made a decision that would change everything for both humans and Valthara forever. Ordered the crew to prepare a small shuttle while he put on an environmental suit designed for exploring unknown planets. Ryan tried to stop him and said it was suicide to go down there alone, but Jake knew that someone had to take the risk, and as captain, it was his responsibility. The shuttle bay doors opened, and Jake flew the small craft toward the planet's surface while energy beams exploded all around him. The shuttle's shields held just long enough for him to crash land near the massive crystal structure that Lisa had detected from orbit. Jake climbed out of the damaged shuttle and looked up at the most beautiful building he had ever seen in his life. The Sanctum of Eternal Memory rose into the sky like a mountain made of living light with walls that seemed to pulse and glow with their own inner fire. He knew that he was about to become the first human being to enter the most sacred place of an alien civilization, and that this moment would either save humanity or doom them all to destruction. Jake took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance of the sanctum, knowing that there was no turning back from whatever he would find inside. The massive doors were made of the same crystal material as the walls, and they opened automatically as he approached, as if the building itself was inviting him to enter. Jake stepped across the threshold and became the first human to set foot in the sacred grounds of the Vala people. Jake walked through the crystal doors and found himself inside a space so vast that he could not see the ceiling or the far walls, even with his suit's enhanced vision systems. The entire structure was made of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue and purple light, creating patterns that moved across the walls like slow breathing. Every surface around him contained what looked like frozen figures inside the crystal, and Jake realized these were not decorations, but actual preserved beings from the Valthara race. Millions of crystal formations lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and each one held the body of a Valthara who had died over countless generations. The silence inside the sanctum was complete, except for a low humming sound that seemed to come from the crystals themselves, and Jake felt like he was walking through the largest cemetery in the universe. But this was not just a place where the dead were buried, because as he moved deeper into the structure, the crystals began to glow brighter and images started appearing in the walls around him. Jake stopped walking when the first vision appeared in a crystal near his head, and he saw scenes of Valthara life from thousands of years ago. The beings in the vision looked like tall, elegant creatures, made of living crystal themselves, with bodies that glowed with inner light and faces that showed great intelligence and wisdom. More visions began appearing in crystals all around him, and Jake watched the entire history of the Valthara civilization unfold before his eyes. He saw their great cities that floated in the sky above their planet, and their amazing technology that could control energy itself, and their deep spiritual beliefs that connected them to forces beyond the physical world. But as Jake continued walking through the sanctum, he began to see darker visions that showed the Valthara planet slowly dying as their sun grew weaker, and their world could no longer support life the way it had for millions of years. The visions showed the last generations of Valthara gathering in the sanctum to preserve their memories and knowledge before their entire race disappeared forever. Jake realized that the sanctum was not just a memorial to the dead, but a massive computer system that stored the consciousness and memories of every Valthara who had ever lived. The technology was beyond anything humans had imagined, and it contained the knowledge of an entire civilization that had existed for millions of years, before humans even learned to make fire. As he explored deeper into the sanctum, Jake began to understand that the Valthara were planning something called transcendence, which would allow their consciousness to move beyond physical bodies and exist as pure energy in a higher dimension. The sanctum was the key to this transformation, and all the remaining Valthara were preparing for their final journey. Suddenly the humming sound grew louder, and Jake felt the floor vibrating beneath his feet as massive ships landed outside the sanctum. His communication system crackled to life, and he heard Lisa's voice warning him that a huge Valthara fleet had arrived and was surrounding the area with weapons pointed at the sanctum. Jake tried to leave, but the crystal doors had sealed shut behind him, and he was trapped inside the most sacred place of a race that wanted to kill him for being there. Through his suit's sensors, he could detect dozens of Valthara approaching the sanctum, and their energy signatures showed they were extremely old and powerful beings. The first Valthara entered the sanctum, and Jake saw that they were even more impressive in person than in the crystal visions. They stood nearly 8 feet tall with bodies that seemed to be made of the same crystal material as the walls. but with the ability to move and think like living beings, the leader of the group wore robes that sparkled with starlight and carried a staff that pulsed with the same energy Jake had detected from orbit. This was Kristarch Zethmara, the highest religious leader of the Velthara people, and when he saw Jake standing among their most sacred crystals, his eyes blazed with anger that could have melted steel. Kristarch Zethmara spoke in the Velthara language, and Jake's translation system converted the words into human speech. The Kristarch was saying that Jake had committed the ultimate crime by entering their sacred ground, and that he would be executed immediately as punishment for his blasphemy. More Velthara entered the sanctum, and Jake saw that they were all ancient beings who had lived for thousands of years, and who regarded him as nothing more than a primitive creature that had defiled their most holy place. They formed a circle around him and began preparing weapons that glowed with deadly energy. But then, something unexpected happened that changed everything Jake had thought he understood about the sanctum and the Velthara. When he reached out to steady himself against one of the crystal formations, the crystal began to glow more brightly, and images appeared that were not Velthara memories, but his own human memories. The ancient technology of the sanctum had somehow connected with Jake's human brain and was beginning to record his thoughts and experiences, just like it had done with millions of Velthara over the ages. The crystals around him started showing scenes from his childhood on Earth, and his training as a space explorer, and his journey to this system. Kristarch Zethmara stepped back in shock, because in all the millions of years that the sanctum had existed, no alien consciousness had ever been able to connect with their sacred technology. The other Velthara began speaking rapidly in their language, and Jake could sense their confusion and fear at what was happening. The crystal formations throughout the sanctum began pulsing with new patterns of light, and Jake felt his consciousness expanding beyond his physical body as the ancient Velthara technology tried to understand what a human mind was like. For the first time in their history, the Velthara faced something they had never expected, and Jake realized he might have just changed the destiny of both their civilizations forever. Kristarch Zethmara raised his energy staff and pointed it directly at Jake's chest while speaking words that the translation system said meant immediate death for the human who had violated their most sacred space. But before the Kristarch could fire his weapon, the entire sanctum began to shake, and the crystal walls started making sounds like a massive bell ringing across the universe. Memory crystals that had preserved Velthara consciousness for millions of years were reacting to Jake's human brain in ways that had never happened before, and the harmonic frequencies created by this connection were causing the ancient technology to malfunction in spectacular ways. Dr. Lisa Bennett and the rest of Jake's crew had been captured by Velthara forces outside the sanctum and were brought inside to witness what their leaders called the execution of the human blasphemer. But when Lisa saw the crystal formations responding to Jake's presence, she immediately understood what was happening from her scientific training. Lisa shouted over the noise that human neural patterns were somehow compatible with Velthara memory storage technology, and that Jake's brain was creating quantum resonance patterns that matched the ancient alien systems. She told the Velthara that both species must have evolved from similar consciousness principles, which made humans the first aliens capable of interfacing with their sacred crystals. Jake felt his mind expanding as the crystal matrix connected more deeply with his consciousness, and suddenly he was not just seeing Velthara memories, but actually communicating with the preserved consciousness of their ancestors, who had been sleeping in the crystals for thousands of years. Ancient Velthara, spirits that had not spoken since their physical deaths, began awakening throughout the sanctum, and their voices echoed through the crystal formations as they tried to understand what this strange new consciousness was doing in their sacred space. Jake could hear dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of ancient voices all speaking at once. Eldest ancestor known as the First Light had been preserved in the central crystal matrix for over 1 million years and had not communicated with the living world since the early days of Velthara civilization. But now this ancient spirit began to manifest through the crystal network and spoke directly to Jake in words that bypassed the translation system and went straight into his mind. The first light told Jake that the ancient prophecies of the Velthara had spoken of a bridge species that would arrive during their final generation to help them complete their transcendence to a higher plane of existence. The prophecies said this bridge species would be able to connect with their technology in ways that no Velthara could achieve. But this revelation created a massive conflict among the Velthara who were present in the sanctum, because many of them refused to believe that a primitive human could be part of their sacred prophecies. War Commander Velinoth, who led the military forces of their people, declared that Jake was using some kind of human trickery to manipulate their technology war. Commander Velinoth had fought in battles across the galaxy for over 2,000 years and had never been defeated by any enemy force, and he would not accept that a human could have any connection to Velthara spirituality. He demanded that Jake be killed immediately regardless of what the ancient spirits claimed about prophecies. The younger generation of Velthara, led by War Commander Velinoth, began arguing with the older religious leaders about whether to believe the words of the First Light or to follow their original plan to execute Jake for blasphemy. The argument grew more heated as more ancient spirits awakened and began speaking through the crystal matrix. Meanwhile, word of the human intrusion was spreading across all Velthara space through their quantum communication networks and ships. From every corner of their civilization began traveling toward their homeworld. Some Velthara believed that Jake's arrival fulfilled their ancient prophecies, while others saw him as the ultimate enemy, who must be destroyed along with his entire species commander Ryan Phillips, who had been captured with the rest of Jake's crew. Tried to negotiate with the moderate Velthara leaders by offering human assistance with their dying planet in exchange for Jake's life and the prevention of war between their civilizations. But the cultural divide between the different Velthara factions was too deep for simple diplomacy scholar Andira, who was one of the younger Velthara and specialized in studying ancient prophecies, approached Commander Phillips and told him that there might be a way to resolve the crisis. She explained that the prophecies were unclear about whether the bridge species would help the Velthara transcend or would replace them as the guardians of their sacred knowledge. The crystal matrix continued to pulse with increasing energy as more ancient Velthara consciousness awakened and tried to communicate with Jake's human mind. The technology that had been stable for millions of years was now operating beyond its design parameters and threatening to overload. Completely, Jake realized that his presence in the sanctum was causing changes that could not be reversed, and that every moment he remained connected to the crystal network brought both civilizations closer to either salvation or destruction. The ancient voices in his mind were showing him visions of technologies that could save humanity, but also warning him that the price for this knowledge might be higher than anyone imagined. Had Christarch Zeeth Mara watched in amazement as the first light continued to speak through the crystals and confirmed that the humans' arrival had been foretold in their most ancient texts. But War Commander Velinoth refused to accept this and began gathering his military forces to take control of the sanctum by force. Velthara civilization that had been united for millions of years was beginning to split apart over the question of what to do with the human who had somehow become connected to their most sacred technology. Jake could feel the weight of both civilizations' futures resting on decisions that would be made in the next few hours, and he knew that there was no way to go back to the simple life of a space explorer that he had known before entering the sanctum of eternal memory. The Velthara civilization that had been united for millions of years broke apart into 3 warring factions within hours of Jake's connection to their sacred crystal matrix, and each group had completely different ideas about what should be done with the human who had somehow fulfilled their ancient. Professor Stirch Zethmara led the traditionalist faction who believed that Jake must die to preserve their sacred ways, even if he had been mentioned in their prophecies, because allowing an alien to remain connected to their ancestral consciousness would corrupt everything they held holy. The traditionalists represented the oldest and most conservative elements of Veilthara society. Scholar Andira convinced many of the younger Veilthara to join the progressive faction who saw Jake's unique connection to their ancestors as the key to their species' survival, and believed that working with humans could help them complete their transcendence successfully. The progressives were willing to accept change if it meant their civilization could continue. War Commander Velenoth gathered the most militant Veilthara into the purist faction, who wanted to destroy not just Jake, but all of humanity as contamination that threatened their racial purity, and who refused to believe that any alien species could have spiritual value equal to their own. The purists, prepared for total war against the humans. Jake remained trapped in the sanctum, serving as an unwilling bridge between the living Veilthara and their ancient ancestors, whose consciousness continued to awaken throughout the crystal matrix. As his human neural patterns created resonance effects that had never existed before in their technology, the ancient Veilthara spirits began sharing technological secrets with Jake through the crystal network, including the locations of energy sources that could power both human and Veilthara civilizations for millions of years. But each moment Jake spent connected to the Matrix caused him to lose more of his human identity, as alien memories flooded into his mind. Lisa Bennett worked desperately with Scholar Andira to find a way to safely extract Jake from the crystal network before his consciousness became permanently merged with the Veilthara ancestral matrix, and he lost all connection to his human origins. They discovered that the ancient technology was designed to preserve consciousness after physical death, but had never been tested on a living being. The longer Jake remained connected to the crystal matrix, the more the ancient Veilthara spirits became active and began trying to communicate with their living descendants, which threatened to overwhelm the minds of the current generation, who were not prepared for direct contact with millions of ancestor consciousness. War Commander Velenoth launched surprise attacks on both human ships and progressive Veilthara forces, claiming that the contamination had already spread too far, and that the only solution was to cleanse their civilization of all alien influence through military force. His fleet destroyed several human vessels that had arrived as reinforcements from Earth. Command Admiral Paul Carter, who commanded the human fleet, faced an impossible decision about whether to retreat and abandon Jake to save the rest of his forces, or risk full-scale war with an advanced alien civilization that possessed weapons and technology far beyond human capabilities. Space battles around the Veilthara homeworld grew more intense as purist forces attacked anyone who supported Jake's continued existence, while progressive and traditionalist factions fought each other over the correct interpretation of their ancient prophecies. The unity that had defined Veilthara civilization for millions of years was completely destroyed on the planet's surface. The sanctum began to destabilize as the massive influx of awakened ancestor consciousness threatened to overload the crystal matrix that had been operating at normal levels for millions of years. Energy discharges from the overloaded crystals started damaging the structure of the building itself. Realized through his connection to the ancient consciousness that his presence was causing irreversible damage to the very thing the Veilthara held most sacred, and that continuing to use their technology might destroy the repository of memories that contained their entire civilization's history. Scholar Andira revealed to Commander Ryan Phillips that there might be a way to save both Jake and the sanctum, but it would require Jake to make the ultimate sacrifice by remaining permanently connected to serve as a living bridge between the ancient dead and the current generation of Veiltharaith ancient spirits led by the first. Light began showing Jake visions of what would happen if he accepted the role of permanent guardian of their sacred knowledge, and he saw himself transformed into something that was neither fully human nor fully Valara, but a new kind of consciousness that could exist in both worlds. But the visions also showed Jake what would happen if he refused the guardian role and tried to leave the sanctum, and he saw both civilizations destroying each other in wars that would spread across the galaxy and eliminate any chance for peace between humans and Velthara War Commander. Velenov's S-forces began preparing reality, destroying weapons that could erase the sanctum from existence completely, because he believed that destroying their most sacred site was better than allowing it to be contaminated by alien presence. His extreme solution horrified even the traditionalist faction. The crystal matrix continued to pulse with dangerous energy levels as Jake struggled to maintain his human identity while processing the memories and knowledge of millions of ancient Velthara consciousness. He could feel his mind expanding beyond human limits, but also felt the danger of losing everything that made him who he was. Admiral Carter's human fleet engaged War Commander Villeneuve's forces in orbital combat, while progressive Velthara ships tried to protect the sanctum from destruction. But the battle was causing massive damage to the planet's surface and threatening to destroy the entire star system. Jake knew that he was running out of time to make a decision about his future and the future of both civilizations, and that whatever choice he made would determine whether humans and Velthara would become allies or destroy each other in the greatest war the galaxy had ever seen. Jake made the decision that would change his life forever when he told the ancient consciousness through the crystal matrix that he would accept the role of permanent guardian, knowing that this meant he could never return to human space or see his home planet Earth again. But as soon as Jake accepted this sacrifice, the ancient Velthara spirits revealed a deeper truth about their sacred technology that neither the living Velthara nor Jake had understood before. The sanctum was not just a memorial or storage system, but a massive computational matrix designed to calculate the precise conditions needed for consciousness to survive the transition from physical existence to pure energy the Veltharas planned. Transcendence required enormous mathematical calculations that would determine the exact quantum frequencies needed for their consciousness to move to a higher dimensional plane without being destroyed in the process. Their dying planet could no longer provide enough energy to complete these calculations before their sun became too weak to support any life. Jake's human neural patterns provided a missing computational component that the Velthara technology had been searching for across millions of years of evolution. Human consciousness operated on quantum principles that were similar to but different from Velthara thought patterns, and this difference created the mathematical bridge needed to complete their transcendence calculations in exchange for Jake's permanent service as a living computational bridge. The ancient Velthara offered to share technologies with humanity that would solve their energy crisis permanently and allow human civilization to expand across the galaxy without ever running out of power sources again. Dr. Lisa Bennett worked with scholar Anvira to develop a modified interface that would allow Jake to serve as the bridge between species without losing his human identity completely. The solution required creating a hybrid consciousness that would be part human and part Velthara, but had never existed before in the history of either civilization. The technical challenge was enormous because the interface had to preserve Jake's human memories and personality while allowing Velthara consciousness to flow through his mind and use his neural patterns for their transcendence calculations. One mistake in the design could destroy Jake's mind or corrupt the ancient Velthara spirits. War Commander Villeneuve learned about the plan to create a hybrid consciousness and declared that this was the ultimate contamination of Velthara purity, and launched a final assault on the sanctum itself, with weapons designed to destroy the building and everything inside it, including Jake and all the ancient spirits. The purist faction believed that destroying their most sacred site was better and allowing it to be shared with an alien species, and they brought reality, destroying weapons that could erase matter from existence at the quantum level. These weapons had never been used before because they were too dangerous even for the advanced. Valthara Technology Admiral Paul Carter's human fleet engaged the purest forces in the most intense space battle that had ever been fought in this region of the galaxy, while progressive Valthara ships tried to defend their homeworld from their own people. The energy weapons being used by both sides threatened to destroy the entire star system. Jake realized through his connection to the ancestral matrix that he had one final option that no one else had considered. Using his unique bridge position, he could channel the combined consciousness of millions of dead Valthara to defend their sacred ground, but doing this would require him to temporarily become the living embodiment of their entire species history. Commander Ryan Phillips and scholar Andira raced against time to complete the hybrid consciousness interface before War Commander Velanoth's assault succeeded in destroying the sanctum. They had only hours to finish technology that should have taken years to develop properly. Jake faced the most difficult choice of his life, as he had to decide between preserving his human identity and saving two entire civilizations from destroying each other. The ancient consciousness showed him visions of what would happen if the purists succeeded, and he saw both humans and Valthara extinct within a few generations. Reality-destroying weapons began firing at the sanctum, and each blast erased small portions of the crystal matrix, along with the ancient consciousness stored inside. Jake watched in horror as millions of years of Valthara history and memory were being deleted from existence by their own people. In the climactic moment, Jake made his final sacrifice and activated the ancestral matrix at full power, allowing the consciousness of every Valthara who had ever lived to flow through his human mind and use his body as a weapon to defend their sacred ground. The power was beyond anything a human mind was designed to handle. The combined consciousness of the Valthara ancestors flowed through Jake like a river of liquid starlight, and he became something that had never existed before in the universe. He was still human, but also carried the memories and knowledge of an entire alien civilization that had existed for millions of years. Using this incredible power, Jake reached out through space and disabled War Commander Velanoth's reality-destroying weapons before they could finish erasing the sanctum from existence. The purist fleet found their ships powerless as Jake's hybrid consciousness took control of their technology and forced them to retreat. But the effort of channeling millions of Valthara consciousness through his human brain began to burn out Jake's neural pathways, and he felt his human identity starting to dissolve under the weight of alien memories that were too vast for any single mind to contain. Scholar Andira and Dr. Lisa Bennett watched in terror as Jake's vital signs became erratic, and his human brainwaves were overwhelmed by the Valthara consciousness flowing through the crystal matrix. They realized that saving both civilizations might cost Jake everything that made him human. The ancient consciousness, led by the First Light, tried to withdraw from Jake's mind to save his human identity, but the process had gone too far, and the hybrid state was becoming permanent, whether Jake survived it or not. He was transforming into something entirely new that neither species had ever imagined possible. Jake felt his consciousness expanding beyond the limits of human understanding as he became the living bridge between two civilizations, and realized that he would never again be the simple space explorer who had entered the sanctum just days earlier. Jake survived the transformation, but emerged as something that had never existed before in the galaxy, and he was now a hybrid consciousness that retained his human memories and personality, while serving as a permanent living bridge to millions of ancient Valthara spirits who could communicate with their descendants through his transformed mind. Power he had channeled to defeat War Commander Velanoth's assault left him fundamentally changed, and the sanctum stabilized around his new form, creating a unique symbiotic relationship between human consciousness and Valterra technology that amazed scientists from both civilizations. Surviving Valthara witnessed Jake's sacrifice and underwent a profound cultural transformation. As they realized that their ancient prophecies had been fulfilled in ways they never expected. Christarch Zethmara acknowledged that Jake had proven himself worthy of guarding their sacred knowledge, and the species began their long-awaited transcendence process. Instead of abandoning their physical realm, completely the Valthara chose to leave Jake behind as the eternal guardian of their sacred ground, and they honored his sacrifice by ensuring that the sanctum would remain protected for as long as consciousness existed in the universe. Dr. Lisa Bennett and the surviving members of Jake's crew had to accept the painful reality that their captain and friend could never return to Earth because his consciousness was now permanently linked to the crystal matrix, and removing him would destroy both the sanctum and kill him. In the process, however, Jake's transformation gave him access to technologies and knowledge that he could share with humanity through quantum communication arrays that connected the sanctum to human space across thousands of light years. He became humanity's first permanent ambassador to an alien civilization. Admiral Paul Carter established a permanent human research station in orbit around the Valthara homeworld, and Jake became the coordinator for all interactions between the species. The energy technologies he provided revolutionized human space travel and solved the resource crisis that had originally brought them to Valthara space. The Valthara completed their transcendence over several months, with most of the species moving beyond physical existence to become beings of pure energy that could travel between dimensions and explore realms that physical creatures could never reach. Scholar Andira chose to remain in the physical realm, along with a small group of other Valthara who wanted to serve as co-guardians of the sanctum and help Jake adapt to his hybrid existence. She became his closest companion and taught him how to manage the flow of ancient consciousness through his transformed mind. Years passed, and Jake became a legend in both human and Valthara civilizations as the being who had bridged the gap between two completely different forms of life and consciousness. Stories of his sacrifice spread across the galaxy and inspired other species to seek peaceful contact rather than making the same mistakes that had nearly led to war. Jake learned to control his hybrid abilities and could access the memories and knowledge of any Valthara who had ever lived while maintaining his human personality and emotions. He became the keeper of the greatest library in the galaxy, containing millions of years of alien wisdom and experience. Transcended Valthara visited Jake, regularly appearing as beings of pure light who could communicate with him through the crystal matrix, and they shared knowledge about the higher dimensions they now explored. They told him about other ancient civilizations that existed beyond physical space. Human ships arrived regularly at the research station, bringing young explorers and scientists who wanted to learn from Jake and study the incredible technologies preserved in the sanctum. Each new group was amazed to meet a human who had been transformed by alien consciousness, but still remembered what it was like to be fully human. Jake realized that his role had evolved beyond just being a guardian of Valthara knowledge, and he had become a bridge between the physical universe and the higher dimensional realms, where consciousness could exist without bodies. He helped other species understand the possibilities that awaited them. The technologies shared through Jake's connection to the Valthara allowed humanity to build faster ships and more efficient energy systems and establish colonies in distant galaxies that had been unreachable before. Human civilization expanded across the stars, following the path that Jake had opened. But Jake's greatest achievement was not the technology he provided, but the example he set for peaceful contact between different forms of consciousness. His willingness to sacrifice his human life to prevent war between civilizations became a model for diplomatic relations across the galaxy. Scholar Andira often sat with Jake in the crystal chamber, where he maintained his connection to the ancient consciousness. and they would discuss the philosophical implications of his transformation. She told him that he had become something greater than either human or Velthara could achieve alone in the final years of his guardianship. Jake watched new generations of humans arrive at the research station, and he saw in their faces the same curiosity and determination that had driven him to explore unknown space so many years before. He realized that his sacrifice had created opportunities for others to make their own discoveries. The story ended with Jake touching the crystal matrix one final time and feeling the consciousness of millions of Velthara, ancestors flowing alongside his human memories in perfect harmony. He understood that he had become something entirely new in the universe, and that his legacy was not just the sacrifice he had made, but the future he had helped create for all conscious beings. Jake Morrison had been the first human to enter the sacred grounds of an alien civilization, and by choice and circumstance, he had become the last to leave. His transformation from space explorer to hybrid guardian opened pathways between worlds that would guide the evolution of consciousness itself for millions of years to come.